Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll start this Menachot daf Dalid. We're going to begin on Dalid Amud Aleph by the two dots, about 8 lines from the top. So the beginning of our Masechta mentioned that when a person would bring a mincha, which was done shalol l'shema, for example, machvas or marcheshes, etc., it says that you could continue to bring it for the rest, and it's kosher. It's not oil l'shem chayva. However, when it comes to a minchas chayte, chutz minchas chayte, minchas kanais, which is the mincha for a sota, and that we make an exception, and we say no, it is possible. Now bishlam minchas chayte, which by the way we also mentioned in part in Masechtas Zvachim, the same thing when it comes to a carbon chatas, that's possible. Now, when it comes to a minchas chayte, I understand, because kari rachmano yasim aleha minchas chatas chayta. Let's start again. Bishlam minchas chayte chatas kari rachmana. The Torah calls it a chatas. So, therefore, again, it should have the same dinim as a carbon chatas. Okay. So, says Rashi, ma chatas psul shul shma, afi psul shul shma. So we already knew that from before. Yosim aleha shemen v'litin aleha lavoina ki chatasi v'goymer. Okay, and the pasuk says that there should not be any oil, there shouldn't be any frankincense, and it says ki chatasi. So that's the pasuk, which explicitly mentions that it's like a chatas. Okay. How do we know when it comes to a minchas saita that the din also is that if it was shul shema, that's possible. The tani and also therefore we probably want to find the word chatais in the pasuk. So menon, so tani kamed Rav Nachman minchas kanais mutra nadava. So what does that mean? Or it says over ma minchas chatois mutra nedava. The extra money, the meiser, the extra money that would be dedicated and designated as the value of the price of the barley went down after the money was designated for the saita. So therefore, you already had a certain amount of money designated, and I have extra money, so it could be brought as a nadava. So what does that mean? So says Rashi, davar haba ma'meiser chatos, anything that comes from the leftovers of a chatos, ma'meiser asham, habaser lashem, v'oideis kohanim. So it's designated specifically that it's supposed to be given over as a carbon, and that's it. So amalei shaper ka'amrit. You're saying a good thought. There's a pasuk says miskaris avoin ksiv, that it's a way of remembering the chet. Uvachatas ksiv, when it comes to a carbon chatas, there's oisa and noisin lachem lase says avon ha'eda. So it mentions avon there too. Machatas maitra nadava, just like when it comes to a chatas, again, if whatever the value, you have money and then you want to buy the materials, the flour, and then it goes down in value, so now you have extra money, so that has to be brought over as the nadava, as again, as the Rashi said, that the moiser achatas and moiser asham is designated as basar ta Hashem, so obviously that's the same din when it comes to a minchas kanais. Minchas kanais moiser nadava. Ukachatas. Machatas psul shul shema, minchas kanais psul shul shema. So therefore, just like it has the dinim of a chatas, that when it comes to the leftover, that this is one of the laws, that the extra monies are given as an adava, so too by minchas kanais. So therefore, we're going to compare other dinim together. And therefore, that's how we know minchas kanais is going to be pasul shul shema. Now, miyata, ashmi he pasul shul shema. The gomer oven machatas. You could say the same thing regarding a carbon asham. There's the same Gzer Shava to tell us the same din when it comes to an Asham. As again, Rashi says, Meiser Chatas Meiser Asham. So it's also the same thing. But we don't say by an Asham that it's possible. We say it's kosher. So done an oven ma'avain, then done oinoim ma'avain. So the psukim are not exactly aligned. And since the words are not exact, so you can't use such Gzer Shava. What are you talking about? We know that's not true. My nafkamina of Hatan Rabbi Shmuel, and this is quoted hundreds of times. Maybe I'm exaggerating. When it comes to, as Rashi says, it's explained in Teres Kohanim, Ma bia chayletz v'kayne v'tach v'noiselo shvua alma garing gzer shava ki agavna v'yaflav d'lo dami hatevis hoya b'shneim loshin bias abayas. This has to do with going into the house regarding the laws of Saras. So it doesn't make any difference. The going and the coming, we have Gzer Shava over there. Even though they're two totally different words, but they have synonymous meanings. That's good enough. Zui Shiva, Zui Bia. So the fact that there's a letter different, but the Shorish is exactly the same, that Gzer Shava should still stand. So we're still back to our question why the din by an asham is different. Ligmar the shmias hakoil. We could say the same thing when it comes to shmias koil, that when it comes to oaths. So in the chiyuv is to have to bring a chatas, as Rashi says, shmias koil's chatasi. Dechsiv im lo yagid v'nasa vaynoi. You'll end up bearing the sin by again not acting in accordance to halacha within the framework of Beis Din and testimony. So there you should say the same thing. That carbon chatas should be the same din. That should be puzzle. El ki gamer gzer shava l'maisin nedavahu de gamri. We're only going to learn out this gzer shava if you already have this link of maiser nedava, like we said by Menachot kanais, which we don't say when it comes to other things. So in second, so maybe you're going to tell me that there's this Gzer Shava, fine, but the Gzer Shava is only going to tell us when it comes to an Asham that it tells us that the Meiser is Nedava. But no, not having anything to do with Shalol Shema. But Ein Gzer Shava Mechsa. If you're making Gzer Shava, it's the Gzer Shava, and therefore it should go all the way, and it should also say the same din by an Asham that should be apostle. Rather, Goli Rachman Gabi Chatas. The pasuk says explicitly by Chatas the Shakad Oisol Chatas Oisol Lishma Oisa. It says you shacht it Lishma Ksheira Shlo Lishma Psula. So it says Beferish that you have to shacht it, which is mashma. It has to be done properly, and therefore, if it was not done properly, it's possible, right? That's what we see clearly when it comes to a chatos. But we don't find that by the asham. Because you don't have a pasuk that actually says it as like a diuk to say it must be lishma. If it's not lishma, therefore must be it's possible, and therefore must be that when it comes to other karbanos, even shul lishma is kosher. So now that's fine to differentiate a chatos and an oila. But how do we know when it comes to a minchas chayta, minchas kanais? So chatos taimamai mishum diksib he. So and to say it's possible shul shema because it says the word he over there. So the he is this is how it must be done. So again, the he is a miyat. Only here it's kosher. Shul shema is possible. Hakinami haksibahu he. So when it comes to minchas kanais, also we have the pasuk. It says he. And therefore, because of that, actually, Rashi is helpful here. The chsiv ba, it says, b'chatos nasi, chatos he, right? V'lo shabo shel shema. So that's what it says over there. So that's the explanation. Okay, great. So as long as it says the word he, therefore it must be shel shema is not good. So 1 second. He, who, it also says that type of a word, which seems to be excluding Shalol Shema, that should be possible by an Asham. No, that can't be. Because when the word who is mentioned in the pasuk by Osham, it's referring to the bringing of the sacrificial parts. Kedestanya. Avul Osham lo nemer bohu. Avul achar haktaris emorim. It only mentions after the haktaris emorim. Who atzma shalo huktaru emorim kosher. Let's say, even though you're not supposed to do this, you're supposed to be makter the evarim, but let's say you didn't. We say it's still kosher. Now, if you didn't do it at all, it's kosher. It's no ikuva. So therefore, obviously, it can't be that pasuk is coming to exclude something, because the whole pasuk is talking about something that even if you didn't do it at all, forget about shalol shema, it would still be kosher. Because shalol shema, the whole issue is dafka when it comes to the arba avodos. Says Rashi, v'hilkach asham lo isel b'shalol shema. It can't possible. The who atzma shalol hukter more kosher, as we said, that even if it wasn't done at all, it's still fine. And Rashi quotes the Gemara in Masechtas Pesachim Nuntes, the nitmu a morav. Let's say they became tamei or she'ovdo lost. Lo ma'akiv kapara v'nechel habasar. You could still eat the basar. Of Pesach v'chatos ksiv hu b'shchita zevach Pesach hu b'zevach nosi ksiv v'shachat oiso b'makom asher yishchat as oila lifnei Hashem chatasu. So that is mentioned by the shchita, by the arba avodos. That is where there could be an exception to say it's only has to be done lishma. Shul lishma would not be good. And it does mention over here Pesach, because in Zvachim it does mention not just chatos is possible, but also the carbon Pesach bizmanai. Velahu lomali. So then, why Taka does it say the word who by an asham? If it's not to exclude anything, because it's talking about the time of the sacrificial parts, which are not ma'akiv at all. Look at the Rav Hunoim Rav. Asham shenitak l're'iyah. If let's say you have a carbon asham, that, for example, when it comes to a carbon chatas, which the din is that if kol chatas mesa, let's say the owner of the animal that was supposed to bring a carbon chatas, that person died, so then that animal also dies. The din is that ba'ashim roye, when it comes to an ashim, if that owner died, is by the chamish chatos mesos and 5 dinim of a carbon chatos. What do we do? So when it comes to an ashim roye, we say that we should let it graze, and then once it grazes and develops a mum, then you could sell it, and then the monies could be given over as in the davers ketzim mizbeach, as Rashi says, v'im kvar nitek l're'iyah shenimsruhu l'roya, it was given over to a shepherd. V'shachtu stam, you shechted it while it was a tam, it didn't yet develop a mum, kashul oila, it's still going to be kosher. Right, so Gemara says, "V'shachtu stam kosher l'shum oila." Fine, l'shum oila nitik l'shum oila, nitik in lo nitik loy. It has to be that you already designated, you already put it out for pasture. Again, you're supposed to let it develop a mum, and then you sell the the monies are taken over, and you purchase another animal, and with that money you go and buy Ketzum is back for an oila. So Maskan, at the end of the day, you're going to bring an oila anyway. So therefore, if it was already nitgriya, then we say it's allowed. So that's the din, provided that at least you had designated it for that purpose. Then we say that it's considered to be an acceptable oila. Again, obviously, the proper thing of doing, of what you're supposed to do, is you're supposed to wait until it develops a mum. But if, as long as it was nituk, then it was already removed, then that itself is enough. But again, maskana, we make a distinction when it comes to a chatas, minchas kanois, minchas chatas, and an oila, the din is that whether or not lishma, shlosh shema is possible. Okay, Omer Rav, minchas oimer. Now we talk about the omer offering, which is brought on Pesach, and that is a matir for grains that were chadash, which were new, that once the minchas oimer was brought, then all of a sudden it's machsher. So, shekamtsa shlosh shema, if you did the kemitza of the minchas oimer, which was a barley offering, then it's psula. That's, interestingly enough, this is another case of a mincha, even though it's not mentioned in our Mishnah at all. Nonetheless, it will also say, we also say it will be puzzle, and therefore it's puzzle to be makdir, and all of its leftovers, which are normally eaten by the Kohen, cannot be eaten. Why? Right? So hoyel vasal hatir vlo hatira. Because the whole purpose was to matir chadash, but since it wasn't done properly, it's not a matir anymore. So therefore, since it was done improperly, shol shema, so therefore, for that reason, it's possible legamri. Says Rashi, so too when it comes to an asham for a nazir. Says Rashi, a nazir who's tamei, maybe asham lahachshir leminin naziris tahara. So he has to count a certain amount of days, and he has to wait until he brings this asham if he became tamei, and therefore it's also it's a lahachshir. So if it wasn't done properly, that also is going to be a psul. As we continue to Daled Mud Beis, the asham atzaira is the same thing, that he's again being used. He brings this asham in order that he's right now secluded and set aside from all three machnais. So now all of a sudden it's a matir, but it has to be done lishma. But it doesn't fix him, and therefore it's not good. Tanan. So here's a little bit of a problem. It says in the Mishnah, Kol menachos shenikmatzu shlosh shman. Does this Mishnah sound familiar to you? Better. So let's say the mincha was done shlosh shma, ksherais, which is mashma everything. So you can continue doing it. It's got to be done properly from now on, as we saw svar or pasuk. But regardless, it's kosher. However, there's a couple of exceptions that the Mishnah is very clear of, the only exceptions. Chutz minchas chayta minchas kanais. Now, v'im isa, if it's true, these other cases, listening now me chutz minchas haimer. So why does it mention minchas haimer? Why isn't that one of the cases? So kikatani bo yochid. When does the Mishnah mention the cases of a mincha? It's a mincha that's for a yochid. But sibro katani. The minchas oimer is brought for the entire congregations, for Gans Klal Yisrael, so therefore it doesn't mention that, even though it's true. The list, which is a limited list, is only for a yochid. So kitani ba beglal atzma, ba beglal zevach lo katani. There's a difference between it coming by itself versus with a carbon. Says Rashi, im hazevach, the minchas oimer ba im hakeves. Etc. So it's not a mincha by itself, it comes with karbanos. Our Mishnah only want to mention cases in which was only a mincha without anything else accompanying it, or vice versa. Kikatani hanach shein kavula hen zman, hadikvula lo zman lo katani. So there's a distinction. We also saw this at the end of Zvachim, when it comes to certain karbanos, especially when it comes to Baba Katana or Baba Gedola, that if it's Koiveh Zman, which is also the mission in Megillah, that if there's something which is a carbon which is somehow linked to time, so that has a different din, right? It could be different kulos. So we don't need to mention those types of cases, which of course Minchas Oimer is totally Mizman, because it's done specifically on Mimecharas HaShabbos, as the language of the pasuk says, the day after the first day of Pesach. Omer Mar, v'cheina to Omer b'Hashem Noz b'Hashem Tzayrish sheshachta sholosh shman psuin hoyevol hachsher v'lo hechshiro. So we mentioned those two. Tanan kol zvachim sheshachta sholosh shman ksherin el shul ol bal mishum chayva chutz mePesach v'chatas. Now this is the first Mishnah Mestachta Zvachim. It says over here Zvachim Beis Amud Aleph, like Baruch Hashem, like. That's, hopefully you would have known that by heart. But regardless, that is the pasuk that when it comes to, again, our Masechta begins about the same concept of mincha. Over there in Zvachim, it begins talking about sholosh shema of a karbonis. The only exceptions is a Pesach and a Chatas. Now, v'im isa listening now michutz ma'ashem nazim ma'ashem etzayra de bo l'hachshir v'lo l'hachshiroi. So why doesn't it mention over there other karbanos, like an Asham Matsayra, Asham Nazir? Kivan di Ika Asham Gazelos, Asham Ilos, to the Kapara Osu, Lupsikale. It's true. It should mention those, but then it would get confusing because there's other types of Ashamois. In addition to Asham Matsayra, Asham Nazir, there's a few other ones. Here mentions Asham Gazelos, Asham Elois. There's also Asham Tolui, and Ashim Shivcha Charufa. But regardless, when it comes to the Ashim Gezelos, if you stole, or Me'ila, right, you misused and got hana from something of hektish, all these cases, the reason why you're bringing the asham is because of kapara, and therefore lupsikale. It doesn't want to mention it because for kapara maybe it's different, right? So therefore the din could be different, and therefore it doesn't want to mention these two exceptions because then we would have to get more into the nitty gritty of everything else. So ma'ishna asham nazir v'asham atzayra. So haninami bol kapara v'loy kipru. I don't understand. So if the whole issue why asham atzayra, asham nazir we're saying is possible is because it's a machshir. So how about these other ones? They're a mechaper, right? So isn't that also important? So why shouldn't it be the fact that it was not mechaper because it's lo ol shem chayiva? So so then why don't we say the same thing? It should be possible. What's the difference between being a machshir and being mechaper? So Rav Yirmiyah Metzinu shechil kakasu ben mechaper and ben machshirin. We do see a distinction between the two. How do we see that? Mechaperin isbahu yosel achamisa. There is a time in which when it comes to when it comes to kapara, it could still somehow be brought even l'achamisa. Machshirin leisbahu de'asal achamisa. When it comes to a carbon, which is the whole purpose to be machshir, to achamisa it's not brought. Did not. To isha shehavia chatasa. Let's say you have a woman, and she gave birth, and she has a chiv to bring a carbon chatas. Rashi says v'chatas yoledes machshahu. So the chatas over there is actually a machshir. Once she brings the chatas, she can now eat kodshim again. Umesa, and she dies. Yaviu yorshin oilasa. So what do we see? That the yorshin, because she already brought the chatas, but she didn't have the oila brought, she has to bring the chatas and an oila. So the fact is, since she already brought the chatas and she died tragically, so her yorshim could still bring the oila. So what do we see? We see the oil. So again, the chatas, interestingly enough, is the machshir, and the oila is not a machshir. So we see, interestingly enough, a situation that when it comes to a machshir, there's which is the chatas. Let's say it the other way around. Oila so mesul yavi yorshin chatasa, because the chatas yoledes is a machshir. So we see clearly when it comes to a machshir, if the person died, we are more strict. However, when it comes to the concept of being a machshir, we're more strict, and therefore it could be pasul shelo shma. When it comes to a chatas, when it comes to rather the other way around, something which is a mechaper, we're not as strict, and therefore maybe it will be kosher. Okay, fine, it won't be ol shem chayiva, but it's not going to be pasul. Masker Rav Yehuda Rav Shimon ben Pazi, machshirin nami. When it comes to a machshir also, I'll show you that when it comes to a machshir, okay, fine, you're right. When it comes to this one situation, you're not going to bring this chatas, which is by yoledes, because it's a machshir, but I'll show you sometimes that we do. How do we see that? A person who designates monies because he's a nazir, so he has obligations to have to bring certain karbanos, and he designates money for that purpose. So the din is that if a person at that time cannot get hana from that money, midrabanan, because the value of an oila is mixed in, and that would be an isser of me'ila. So that would be an isser. You're not supposed to get hana. However, there's not going to be me'ila. Says Rashi, even though it's true and oila monies are mixed in there, it's shaykh. Since you didn't say elu chatos, elu shlomim, says Rashi, shlomim ein behen me'ila dolav kachi Hashem ninhu elo maman bailim. So when it comes to a shlomim, there's no din like kachim kalam maman bailim. This is specifically about that's Rabbi Yosef Gali, but the may, there's not about the money thereof. So because it wasn't designated, so therefore there's no din me'il on it. because it could always become a shlomim, and a shlomim, it's shaykh, it's there's no din be'il on it. Okay, but midrabanan still don't get hana from it. Mace, and here's the key point we're trying to get to. V'hoyu loy mois stumin, and you have money, says Rashi, shul pirish, il chatas ve'il oil. You didn't designate this money is for this is for that. So yipul nadava. In that situation, the money should be put into the tzedakah boxes, which are called the shoifarais, and that's a halacha mosh mesina by nazir. That's what you're supposed to do when it comes to this. Mafuroshin, let's say you specifically designated this money for specific karbanos, to the mechadas yolchiyam melach. Can't get any hana from it because it has the same din as a chatas shmeis baleha. Because again, since the owner died, it's the same thing as the chatas itself. The fact that the money was designated for a chatas, so it has to be lamisa, just like the animal lamisa, so that monies are destroyed. Well, in the hand of the mu'awin, you can't get any hana midrabanan from that money, but there's no din me'ila there either, as Rashi says, v'lav kachi gavoa ninhu. Okay, because it's going to be destroyed. Demei oila, when it comes to the money of the oil, yemel oila, because you can always bring ketzim mizbech, numualin behen, and therefore there is a din me'ila, because that money was designated for an oila. And demei shlomim, yabim behem shlomim, v'nechamu yom echad. Can be eaten, has been eaten in one day. There's no requirement of accompanying it with breads. Now, what do we see from here? The whole purpose of an oil and a shlamim when it comes to a nazir is to makshir him so he'll eventually be able to drink wine again. So this is a case of a makshir to call also misa. So we see taka when it comes to these karbanos, a makshir can be brought even after he died. Okay, fine, the demei chatas not, but when it comes to the demei oila, it's brought. Demei shlamim is brought, and even though it's a makshir. So Amar Papa Hachi Kaim Rabbi Yirmi Lumatzinu Hechsher Kavua. Here's the key word: Hechsher Kavua. Debol Achamisa. The nazir Hechsher Sheina Kavuahu. Nazir is not a permanent hechsher. What does that mean? That's the key word over here. So Rashi says demei shlamim of a demei asham leika the enu benazir tahar of a benazir tamir machshirai. Let's look at the Gemara is going to explain this a little bit more, because it's all pours over into this next daf. Ventun lechem dem invanosan al kapi hanazir. Okay, because he died, so that's why there's no requirement of lechem. Kavua, says Rashi. This is the third line. De'en sham shum davar acher machshir habalim elohu. There's nothing else to be machshir the owner except this. Says the Gemara in Daf Hey. Diamar gilach al echad mishlashtam yatsa. So the din is that even if the chatas is brought, that would already be the machshir. So therefore, what do we see from here? Says Rashi, I feel al chatas tichsev v'achar yishta hanazir yayin. So actually, it's not necessarily a case of a machshir, because any of the karbanos, even the chatas that would have been brought, would have already been a machshir. So therefore, these other ones are not always a machshir. That means it's not kavua. It's not always going to be a machshir, because the other carbon, the chatas, could have been machshir, and the other ones are still brought because that's the procedural mechanism of how things are done. Okay, we're going to stop there at the top of the Amud. Let's see a couple of questions. Question 5. So that's by a minchas oimer. So it's alluded to over here, but we really didn't get to the nuts and bolts of it. We're going to end up seeing this soon. Question 6. Elu shamos machshirin hein, ve'elu mechaprin hein. Which ashamos is a machshir? So the answer we're looking for is asham naz and asham mitzara machshirin, but asham gezelos and asham me'ilos are mechaprin. Okay, those are all correct answers, and we're going to continue with 7 next time. Let's see some more questions. TA 13. El machshir matzinu shiboinu achar misa. So these are situations where machshirim can be brought after misa. So we saw this by and the only answer it wants, which is pretty amazing, is oila b'shlamim de nazir. Okay, I would have thought also by yoiledes. For some reason, that's not what they're looking for. Elu Makshirim. Okay, so Eintun and Lechem. So oil v'shlom the nazir the Makshirin who. So we see by an oil and a shlomim of a nazir that it's a machshir that's brought after Misa. Okay, fine. We'll just accept that. Question TB, and again, I'm not sure why it doesn't mention the Yoledes. Question Be'elu Devarim Shava Minchas Kanois Lachatos. So I would say that this has to be from the previous daf. So how do we compare them? So I wrote Lo Ol L'Shem Chayiva Im Shalol Shema, and that's absolutely not what we're looking for. I would say that carbon is, or the mincha is puzzle. And I wrote minchas kanois ein shemen or levina. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for moiser, the extra of the mincha is l'nedava. That's what they want. They don't need to know, like, oh, they both have flour in it. Okay, that's not really what they probably are aiming for us to come up with. I mean, these aren't simple questions, so they're not asking for just like elementary thoughts over here. So minchas kanois moiser nedava. Okay, and also av minchas kanois moiser nedava and machatas psula shalashma. Fine. So those are the two answers. Now let me just add the word shalol shma so I understand what I'm talking about. And that's TB16. Esma matira minchas ayim b'shvias adkan.